Good to be back in the United States after all 1 month in California. Okay, it's been a long time since our last class. We will continue with the left off. We were studying the section on the chapter on wisdom, and we were already into the discourse on right view. This is the Samadhi Sutta. And from the Sutta we've examined the section on wholesome and unwholesome karma, and the section on the four nutrients. Correct?
Page number?
Excuse me?
Page number?
The page number is 325. We're about to start the section on the four nutrients. Okay, so this is the Venerable Sariputta. He's speaking to the monks. And each time he's explaining the meaning of samadhi, right view, how one is a person with right view. And each time he finishes his explanation, the monks ask him to give another explanation of right view. So now we're on the bottom of page 325, this is paragraph 13, and so here the monk asking Sariputta, might there be another way in which a noble disciple is one of right view, whose view is straight, who has confirmed or unwavering confidence in the Dhamma, and has arrived at this true Dhamma, this good Dhamma? Okay, so then Sariputta says there is, and then paragraph 14, he enumerates, or he uses the Four Noble Truths as the subject for explaining the right view. So, looking at the text says, when from a noble disciple understands suffering, the origin of suffering, the cessation of suffering, and the way leading to the cessation of suffering. In that way, he is one of right view and so on, and has arrived at this true Dhamma. Okay, so here, Sariputta takes as the subject the Four Noble Truths. Now, what's interesting to observe is that usually we just take the Four Noble Truths as being the cardinal teaching of Buddhism and the principal teaching of Buddhism. But from this sutta, what we can see is that the main principle of the Buddha's teaching is the principle of conditionality. And so we have many different applications of this principle of conditionality. And they differ from one another simply insofar as they fill in different content into the principle of conditionality. Did I relate the story earlier about how Venerable Sariputta first met the Buddha's teaching through his contact with the monk refugees. Did I do this? No. I think this little story gives us some way to understand what is taking place in this particular sutta, at least the way I see it. Okay, the story is that there were two friends, young Brahmin boys who had been born about the same time. They grew up in villages close together, villages that were near one another. And the two families had been friends for generations, and so the two boys would often meet, play together. They had their Brahminic education together under the same guru. Okay, one boy, his first name was Upachisa, and his mother was named Sari, and so he came to be called Sariputta, which means the son of the mother whose name is Sari. And then the other boy was named, proper name was Kolija, but he belonged to a long-standing Brahmin family named, the family name was Moggallana. Okay, so the two boys, they grew up together, they passed through their boyhood together, they passed through adolescence together. Then when they became young men, they would often go out outings together. Then one day, perhaps they were in their 20s at this time, a kind of traveling troupe of actors came to, they were growing up near the city of Rajagaha, which was the capital city of the state of Magadha. And one day, this troupe of traveling actors came to the city of Rajagaha and staged a performance which extended over several days. There would be drama, comedy, singing, dancing, and so on. Okay, so on the first day, they call it the Hilltop Festival, which was conducted on a hill outside the city of Rajagaha. Okay, so on the first day, these two young men bought tickets to the festival, they went to the festival, and they enjoyed themselves immensely. When there was drama taking place, they were excited and intensely interested. When there was a comedy, they would laugh. When the singing was taking, when songs were being played, they would sing along. Perhaps when dancing was going on, they would watch the dancers. Okay, so they enjoyed themselves the first day. The next day, they decided to buy tickets and attend again. So this time they attended and they watched. And as they were watching, their interest was starting to fade a little bit. Somehow, the drama, the comedy, the songs, the dancing did not awaken their interest as keenly as it did on the first day. But still, they decided, let's go on. Watch it the third day. And so again, the third day came around, they bought tickets, they went to the festival. And as they were sitting there watching the performances, both of them at the same time had the same thought. Both of them were thinking, these actors who look so beautiful, so handsome, who are so full of life and energy, after 100 years, they'll all be dead. And we too will also be dead. So, all life is impermanent. What is the use of just enjoying ourselves, spending our time in worldly, sensual enjoyment? I think I should leave the whole life and go out and become a wanderer seeking a path to liberation. And both of them had the same thoughts at the same time, yet didn't tell the other. But when they had left the festival, as they were walking to their homes, each of them noticed that the other seemed rather somber. And so first, Kolita asked his friend Upatissa, Sariputta, why is it that today you don't seem so cheerful? And then Sariputta told him the thought that was on his mind. And then he said to his friend Kolita, and you too, you don't seem so full of joy, full of humor today. What's been weighing on your mind? And then Kolita said, I've had exactly the same thought that you had. And so together, they decided to leave their home life and go out and seek a path to liberation. And so they perhaps secretly, without informing their parents, renounced the home life. They gave up their worldly clothes, and they put on yellow robes, shaved their heads, and they went searching all over northern India, seeking some teacher who could guide them and enlighten them. But in the end, they didn't find anybody who really satisfied them. At the time, they were staying under a teacher whose name was Sanjaya. They weren't really satisfied with his teaching, but they just decided that he seemed to be quite clever, intellectually gifted teacher, and so they would live at his ashram and receive instructions from him. But one day, the two went off. Each day they would go off to different villages to collect their alms. Okay, so one day, Sariputta had gone to a village. He had finished his own alms round, when suddenly he saw coming down the path one of the Buddha's first 5 disciples, whose name was Asati. This was a monk who was walking very serenely, very calmly, mindful, fully aware, fully alert. Each time he would stop at a house, he would collect a little alms food, he would bless the donor, and then go on quietly to the next house. And so when Sariputta saw this monk walking around ground, immediately his eyes just fixed on him, and his mind devoured the sight. He thought, this is truly an enlightened person, one who has reached the goal that we have been seeking ourselves. And so he waited till this monk Asati finished his alms round. Then he approached the monk Asati and asked him, who are you? Do you train under some teacher? Who is your teacher? Under whom have you left the household? Then Asati told him that there is a prince from the Shakya clan who has become the enlightened one. They call him the Buddha, or the Padavan, the Blessed One. And that is, he said, this is my teacher, and I follow his training. Then Sariputta said, what is his teaching? Please explain his teaching to me. So Asati said, this is not yet the time for explanation. I've just finished my alms round. Please wait until I finish my meal. Sariputta went off to the side. Asati finished taking his meal. And then Sariputta approached him again and asked for teaching. Then Asati said, I really don't, even though he was an arhat, was fully liberated, but he felt very modest and humble. And he said, I really don't know the teacher's teaching in detail, and so I can't explain it to you at great length. But Sariputta said, I don't need a detailed explanation. Just tell me the essence. Tell me the core of his teaching. Then Asati replied, in that case, I'll just tell you the basic principle of the whole teaching. Then Anthology says, Ye Dhamma Hetu Bhava He Sanja Hetu Tathagato Aha Yoga He Sam Brahman Bodhi Mahasamana. Whatever things there are that originate from a cause, the Tathagata, that is the Buddha, has declared the cause, and also that which is their cessation. This is the teaching of the great ascetic. And when Asati spoke those verses, then Sariputta, right on the spot, gained the first stage of enlightenment. This is called the arising of Dhammachakkhu, the eye of the Dhamma. Okay, so this verse became, the trigger that ignited the enlightenment experience of Sariputta. Whatever dhammas, whatever phenomena there are that originate from a cause, the Buddha has explained their cause and also their cessation. So in this simple four-line stanza, we have the principle of causation, or the principle of conditional arising. In the two modes, the two aspects, the aspect of origination and the aspect of cessation. And so the question is, what are these dhammas that originate from a cause? And the way I understand the Samadhi Sutta, it's almost like Sariputta's commentary on this verse through which he gained enlightenment. Here he's explaining from different angles the phenomena that originate from cause, that originate from conditions. He's explaining what their conditions are and how they feed to the cessation of their conditions. And so we saw this already with regard to the wholesome and unwholesome types of action, which originate from, respectively, the wholesome and unwholesome roots. And now we see the same thing in regard to we've already seen the same thing with regard to the four nutriments. And now, in this section, we see this with regard to dukkha, or suffering. And so the Four Noble Truths, so they're given so much attention when people are explaining Buddhism, but when we examine them in relation to other teachings of the Buddha, what we can see is that the Four Noble Truths are simply elaborating this principle of conditionality, the principle of conditional arising, using suffering as the subject matter. Okay, so first in paragraph 14, Sariputta gives the concise teaching. And then in 15, in order to elaborate, first he raises the question, what is meant by suffering? What is the origin of suffering? What is the cessation of suffering? And what is the way leading to the cessation of suffering? Okay, the word suffering in Pali is dukkha. And so the Four Noble Truths are usually explained, or let's say they're usually stated simply by using the four key terms that represent each truth. Okay, so the four main terms in Pali are dukkha, which is what is translated as suffering, then the word samudaya, which means origination, origin or origination. The word udaya means arising, and then sun, the prefix sun, suggests some degree of complexity. So it's not just a simple arising, but a complex process of origination. Then the word nirodha means stopping or cessation, and magga is path or way. And then these Four Noble Truths fall actually into two groups. The first two truths represent the aspect of the word bondage. So you say is the aspect of samsara, becoming, the aspect of repeated existence within samsara, surrounds of birth and death. And the second two truths represent liberation, how one becomes free from bondage to samsara. And then within these two groups, the two truths are connected in a cause and effect relationship. And so the truth of origin, samudaya, is the cause, the underlying cause for dukkha, for suffering. And then the path, the magga, here we have to introduce a little qualification. The path is not the cause for cessation, but the path is the means for attaining the cessation of suffering. This is because the cessation of suffering is actually, the ultimate meaning is nibbana. And so the path isn't the cause that brings nirvana into existence, because nirvana is said to be always existing. But the path is the way to reach nibbana, to attain nibbana. I illustrate this with a little simile. It's like we might have a city, like New York City, and then we have a road like Tacoma Parkway. And so, no, it's not Tacoma, it's Taconic Parkway.
Taconic.
Just Tacoma Washington. The Taconic Parkway is the road for reaching New York City. So we take the road and we reach the city, but the road doesn't bring the city into existence. Okay, so this is the relationship between these four truths. Often it's said in popular books on Buddhism that the Buddha modeled the four truths after a formula that was used in Indian medicine. That is, when a physician is treating an illness, what he does first is to diagnose the illness. That's like the first noble truth. Then the physician has to find out what is the cause of the illness. That's like the second noble truth. Then the physician has to find out whether the illness can be cured. That is the third noble truth. Then the physician prescribes a course of treatment. That is like the fourth noble truth, the truth of the path. So it's commonly said, often you'll read this, that the Buddha modeled the Four Noble Truths after this formula used in Indian medicine. And the reason why I'm saying you'll read this in popular books on Buddhism is because there are no medical treatises from before the time of the Buddha. And early Indian medicine is very much influenced by Buddhism. Some of the foremost writers of the medical treatises were Buddhists. So it's quite possible, rather than the Buddha having been influenced by the medical formula, that the authors of the medical treatises in ancient India were influenced instead by the Buddha's formula of the Four Noble Truths in setting out the process of treating an illness. now let us go back to the sutta and see how the Four Noble Truths are now going to be explained in greater detail. So now the Buddha begins with, it's not the Buddha, it's Venerable Sariputta, but he's actually just using the Buddha's words, the Sariputta, is to explain the first Noble Truth, the truth of suffering. So what is suffering? Birth is suffering, aging is suffering, illness is suffering, death is suffering, sorrow, resignation, pain, dejection, and despair are suffering. Not to get what one wants is suffering. In brief, the five aggregate subjects of clinging are suffering. So this is called suffering. So in this first Noble Truth, we have the fact or the truth of suffering explained by simply enumerating different types of suffering. And these different types of suffering, so they're lumped together in a sense, but we could divide them up in different ways. So one way we can do this is by taking first types of physical or bodily suffering. Here we have birth, aging, illness, and death. All types of bodily suffering. Then we have different types of mental or psychological suffering. Sorrow, lamentation, dejection, and despair. Pain in the middle is the bodily suffering. Okay, and then not to get what one wants is suffering. This is also a type of psychological suffering. But then the last statement is more difficult, and that is the five aggregate subjects of clinging are suffering. So what are these five aggregates? The five aggregates are bodily form, feeling, perception, volitional formations, and consciousness. We've met the five aggregates again and again. But here, the Buddha, Sariputta following the Buddha, calls these five suffering. This doesn't mean that the five aggregates are always painful, always in a state of dejection or sorrow. But this is now pointing to a different different dimension of the meaning of dukkha. Here the sense is not a kind of self or experience suffering, but the actual meaning is unsatisfactory, imperfect, inadequate. So why are the five aggregates said to be dukkha, in the sense that they're imperfect, unsatisfactory, inadequate? The reason is that they are all impermanent. Because they are impermanent, arising and passing away, one cannot find in them any kind of permanent happiness, any kind of permanent security and satisfaction. If one clings to the five aggregates, taking them to be mine, myself, or if one is seeking happiness in the five aggregates, then the result will be disappointment. And then one will experience actual suffering. But even when we are experiencing happiness and pleasure through the five aggregates, there's some kind of subtle clinging to them. Some kind of subtle clinging to this experience of happiness and joy. And that underlying clinging is making us vulnerable to suffering in the future when our experience changes, fail to attain what we want. And then the five aggregates will become actual suffering. And so, all the time, as long as there is this underlying clinging in the five aggregates, the five aggregates themselves are dukkha in the sense that they are unsatisfactory, incapable of giving us the deep, lasting, permanent satisfaction that we crave for. And so I call the five aggregates. We spoke about physical suffering, then psychological suffering, and now I would call the five aggregates themselves, we use a rather philosophical term, existential suffering. So constantly throughout our existence, from birth to death, all of our worldly experience, even deep experience of higher meditative states like the jhanas, is dukkha, because it's the breeding ground of clinging. And this clinging is what builds up our vulnerability to experience suffering. The clinging is what makes us vulnerable to suffering. Okay, another way to divide up these different aspects of suffering we can make a threefold distinction of occasional suffering, repeated or frequent suffering, and constant dukkha. Okay, the occasional suffering, this is birth, because in any life one is born over each month. Aging, of course when you get old then it's constant, but but none of us get there, even when we're 80 years old, we think, when I get old, then I'll fix the suffering. And illness, well, for most people, illness is something that happens occasionally. So there are some who have chronic illness, then unfortunately that becomes for them chronic suffering. And then death is something that only happens once in a lifetime. Okay, so those are types of occasional suffering. Then types of, well, frequent suffering. Sorrow, lamentation, pain, dejection, and despair. Well, maybe despair is not so common, but the other types of suffering people go through repeatedly in the course of a lifetime. And also not to get what one wants, this is very common. Then the five aggregates subject to clinging, this is constant, continuous dukkha. Okay, there's another way in which the text explains the meaning of dukkha. And this is by enumerating three types of suffering. Maybe I'll use some Pali words for these. Okay, dukkha dukkha. It means dukkha due to felt or experienced suffering. So this includes all bodily and mental painful experience. When we add the ending ta, ta, dukkha, ta, it just turns it into a noun or an abstract noun. So you could say that this is suffering due to bodily and mental painful experience. Then the second type is called viparinama dukkha. This is suffering due to change. And this refers to all types of pleasant experiences, all types of happy experiences of happiness, joy, delight, satisfaction, contentment, in which there's some underlying clinging or grasping. Because when the pleasant, enjoyable experience changes, then we undergo self-experience suffering. So even when one is in the midst of delight and pleasure, so let's say the wealthy financier who's living in a Manhattan penthouse, and he might have homes in the countryside, another home on the French Riviera, and he has a private plane, what else does he have? A yacht, luxury dinner, beautiful wife, two charming little children. What else makes it like really happy?
Jewels and fine pendants. Jewels and fine pendants.
Okay. He has some jewelry? Maybe the wife has the jewelry. But he's an art connoisseur, he has the paintings on the wall. Okay, so maybe everything that life can offer, so he imagines. But then stock market crashes, his investments fell. So he has to sell the home on the Riviera, has to give up his plane, private plane, sell the yacht. Then his wife becomes disgusted with him, takes the two children, moves away. To support himself, he decides to sell the paintings, to move out of the penthouse. So everything changes, and now all of that glory vanished and gone. And so now he feels so miserable, so dejected. But even let's assume that no stock market crash, but he's making $500 million a year. But then he learns that his competitor is making $700 million a year. And so he reads some reports, Mr. Bernstein getting $700 million, I'm getting $500 million. Oh, this is terrible. How can I continue to live under these conditions? So he's never satisfied. He has to go on maybe cheating, embezzling funds, or maybe striving to impress the board of directors so he'll get a raise or some benefit to get up to 700 million. So now he's got 800 million. So now he's very happy, very satisfied. But then his competitor, he finds out he got a raise, he's getting $1 billion. So now, he's so miserable. Can't be satisfied. 800 million a year. But he feels like he's a pauper. Okay, so now he's with 800 million, he's not satisfied. So this is the way this kind of satisfaction is so subjective. Okay, so this is suffering due to change in one's fortune, and things that would normally be causes of happiness and satisfaction become causes of experienced suffering. The third type of dukkha, this is called sankhara dukkha. This means the suffering due to, how to translate, due to conditioned formation. And this is the unsatisfactory nature of the five aggregates themselves. Because what is it that we take to be I or myself? It's just the compound of the five aggregates, which are factors of existence that are impermanent, always changing, arising and passing away. And so when we look at them very closely, we see that they're really dukkha. So this is the type of understanding of dukkha that ordinarily we don't have this. This is something that can only be experienced by the people who gain very deep insight. In our ordinary condition, we don't find or feel the five aggregates to be unsatisfactory or dukkha. But when we gain very deep insight, we see how these five aggregates, what we call ourselves, is just a set of five aggregates that are always arising and passing away. Then we can experience these five aggregates as being dukkha. One commentary compares it to, sometimes you get a hair in the eye, and it's very painful, right? But now, if we take the hair, and we put the hair in the palm of the hand, do you feel it as painful? So this is the way we are in our ordinary life. We have the five aggregates, they're always arising and passing away. But our minds, our undeveloped mind, is like the hand. We don't experience the five aggregates as being painful. Just like the hand doesn't experience the hair as being painful. But if we get the hair into the eye, then somebody might put the most delicious food on the table and say, please enjoy yourself, and you can't even think of eating. Somebody might play the most beautiful music, but you don't want to listen. Or somebody says, let us go out, take a trip to the countryside and enjoy the scenery. We don't want to go out in the car. All we think about is getting that hair out of our eyes, right? This is like the condition of the mind, which has developed insight into the five aggregates. When one can directly experience these five aggregates as just events arising and passing, then one understands they are really dukkha. Okay, so these are different ways in which we can understand this first noble truth, the truth of sukha or suffering. Okay, now we come to the second noble truth. What is the origin of suffering? Okay, the text gives a little standard formula. It says, it is the craving that leads to renewed existence, to repeated becoming, accompanied by delight and lust, seeking delight here and there. That is craving for sensual pleasure, craving for existence, craving for extermination. This is called the origin of suffering. Okay, so the word that's being translated here as craving is tanha. The Pali word is tanha, which comes from a root meaning thirst, to be thirsty. And since Sanskrit and English are distant relatives, we could see the word thirst more clearly in the Sanskrit form, Krishna. Okay, some people sometimes say that for Buddhism, desire is the cause of suffering, and therefore, to get rid of suffering, one has to get rid of desire. But this is a little bit misleading, because the Pali word that corresponds to desire, chanda, sometimes has a good meaning. So the Buddha encourages wholesome desire to do things that are good and wholesome. But what he teaches is to overcome tanha. Tanha is this self-centered craving, this blind craving. This insatiable thirst. And this craving is described as total bhavika. This is what is translated, leads to renewed existence. Yeah, the word Pono Bhavika is based on another word, Puna Bhava. Puna Bhava means becoming again, or literally again becoming, repeated becoming, repeated existence. And so Pono Bhavika is an adjective based on that noun. So craving leads to repeated existence, because craving is what brings us back again and again to this round of existence, this round of rebirth. And then craving is said to be accompanied by delight and lust. Delight and lust are actually two aspects of craving. Delight, let's say lust first, lust, raga. This is the craving to obtain what one doesn't yet possess. Craving to acquire more, to acquire new things, to experience new pleasures. And then delight, this is the way craving operates when we obtain what we want, and then we become attached to it, and we take pleasure in it. We try to extract pleasure from it. But it is the nature of craving never to be satisfied with what one gets. So that's why craving is described as happy tatra tatrapi nandini. It is seeking delight here and there. And so, for example, if you are a music producer, you know, putting out popular music, you know that every few months or so, one has to change the popular sound. You can't just let people become satisfied with the old classics. You know, in this generation, people now, they can't listen to the Beatles anymore, to the Rolling Stones, but always have to find new styles of rock or pop music, so people not satisfied with the old music, now we have to hear the latest band changing styles. I mean, I'm way back. What is that, hard rock, heavy metal rock? I don't know the style, but always have to change. Folk rock, India rock. With clothing, fashion, you always have to change the fashions every 3 months, every season. So, the fall fashion of 2007, when fall 2008 comes around, you can't let people be satisfied with the fashions of fall 2007. Is this correct? Because I don't follow fashion. So, have to change the style. So, one year, the dresses become short, or skirts, so all the women think they have to get the short skirts. But then the next year, the fashion designers think, if we start promoting short skirts this year, the women will think, with the same color, same cut, same design. They'll think, well, we bought these skirts last year, no need to buy again this year. And so, the next year, you either have to make the long skirts become fashionable, or you change the pattern. So sometimes very plain skirts will be in fashion, other times the skirts with elaborate fancy designs. Then the automobiles, every year they change auto design? Do they still do that every year?
Less so.
Less so. Now they realize that they have to, well, for one thing, the auto manufacturers are in trouble if people just won't buy the cars, so much if you just keep on changing at the least. But I remember when I was growing up, a young boy, happily interested in the latest model cars every year. It would be like late August, September. Always think, what are the new models? It would be September that the new models for the following year would come out. And they were always building bigger California, fancier, more aggressive-looking headlights. Okay, so people are always seeking the light here and there. And then this is what goes on not only within one life, but this is what drives the round of rebirth, is that seeking the light, always seeking new experiences, new forms of pleasure. Okay, so now we have 3 types of craving. Craving for sensual pleasures, pleasures of the 5 senses, 5 physical senses. Craving for existence. This is called bhavana. This is the craving to go on, or to exist in a particular way. What's meant by bhava is a particular concrete state of existence. And this refers particularly to the type of craving based upon a belief in an eternal existence. And so, somebody will have the idea that in such and such a heavenly realm, the beings are eternal, everlasting, and so they will have the craving to be reborn into this realm. In India, at the Buddha time, there were many different conceptions of different heavenly realms, different Brahma realms, realms of the high divinities. And so people believing in different schools of religion, different philosophical schools, would conceive one state or another of existence as being the highest, the ultimate, eternal existence. But we could also take this craving for existence to be, perhaps we could take it more concretely as being the craving to achieve some particular status, even in this human world. For example, our upcoming young businessman has the craving to become the president or CEO of the company. Maybe some young aspiring movie actress has the aspiration, the craving to become the Academy Award winning #1 actress in America. Even monks have this craving. They get out in the Buddhist countries monastic titles. You get to be Rajasiya Pandita, sometimes very long titles, Sadhana, Discourses, Sadhana, Sovana, Rajasiya Pandita, Mahanayaka Tero. So I hear that my particular branch of the monastic order is giving out this title once a year. So I have the yearning and longing, I have to be the one who gets that title. Going to some other monks, I'm unhappy, miserable. I have to get it the next year. Then I get it, and I think, now I am this or here, the after the over, the key, Pandita, Mahadaya. Maybe I have a plaque in my room. Okay, craving for existence. And then comes something that seems to strike us as a bit strange. It's literally, well, in Pali it's called vibhavatanha. Craving for existence is bhavatanha. Craving to become. Vibhavatanha. Vibhava is an end to existence, an end to becoming. And sometimes, usually as Western interpreters explain vibhavatanha as the type of craving that leads people to commit suicide. But I've never seen the term explained in this way in Buddhist texts. In fact, very seldom is any explanation of vibhavatanha given in the canonical text. But the few places where one does find some indication of what is meant, it doesn't seem to be the kind of craving that leads somebody to commit suicide. Rather, it is the craving accompanied by the view that at death everything comes to an end, that there's no continuity of personal existence, of experience beyond death. Okay, craving for existence is called bhavatanha, and the third type of craving is called vibhavatanha, the craving to end existence, to end becoming. But this is the craving accompanied by the view that at death, everything comes to an end, and that the person, the being, is exterminated at death. seems, this is the way I would understand this type of craving. It could be a case where people are subjected in the course of their life to many different types of suffering, and so they become filled with a kind of despair, and then this leads them to adopt the view that at death everything comes to an end. All experience, all individual existence comes to a complete end. And then that view will reinforce the craving for everything to come to an end. The craving for everything, all experience, to come to a complete end at death. But according to the Buddha, this type of craving is not able to resolve the problem of existence, since this craving just supports or sustains the continuity of existence. Okay, now, interesting question. How is craving the origin of dukkha, the origin of suffering? Usually, we think of this just in an immediate psychological way. But in my understanding, there are different dimensions or different aspects to the causal relationship. So one aspect is what I would call the psychological causation. At the psychological level, craving is a cause for suffering. And we can see this most clearly in the dukkha, types of dukkha, not to get what one wants is suffering. Sometimes this is elaborated to be united with what is disagreeable is suffering, and to be separated from what is agreeable is suffering. Not to get what one wants is suffering. So when one has a craving for pleasant contact, associating with pleasant people, obtaining objects of pleasure, then when one fails to get what one wants, then one experiences suffering. When one loses the pleasant possessions and enjoyments and people that one has had, then one experiences suffering. Even when we possess the enjoyable possessions and the enjoyable human relationships that we desire, because there is some deep clinging to these possessions and these people, then there's some kind of underlying anxiety or agitation in the mind, and this is a form of suffering too. The husband clings to his wife, the wife clings to her husband, the parents cling to their children. And so even when the relationship is going smoothly between husband and wife, parents and children, but maybe deep within the mind there's some worry, some concern, some anxiety that there will be separation, that one of the partners will go off in their own way, that the child will rebel against the parents, or the child will get sick and die. And then all of this could be a cause of an agitation or disturbance, even in the midst of a peaceful, serene, day-to-day existence. Okay, so in your own mind then you can work out various ways in which there's a psychological causation between craving and suffering. But I don't think that this is an exhaustive explanation of how craving is the cause of suffering. What we find mentioned repeatedly in the text often explained in the text is that craving is the principal factor that causes renewed existence, repeated existence. Craving is the propelling force, the driving force behind the cycle of rebirth, samsara. And so at this level of causation, we can see that the craving coming over from the previous life is what brings into being the five aggregates that constitute our existence in the new life. The craving is the dynamic force at the base of the cycle of rebirth. It's especially that craving which is said to be seeking enjoyment, seeking delight here and there. And so, for an ordinary person, unenlightened person, when death takes place, that craving for delight, craving for pleasure, craving for existence is not yet finished. And so that craving then becomes the seed which will bring into being a new existence. And what is that new existence? But a new combination of the five aggregates. And so this will go on from life to life after life after life. Okay, so this way craving is the origin of suffering. Then now we come to the third noble truth, what is the cessation of suffering? If suffering is the effect, to eliminate suffering, one has to eliminate the cause. And so the cessation of suffering is the remainderless fading away and cessation of that same craving, giving it up and relinquishing it, freedom from craving or non-attachment. Okay, and just as I explained two levels of causation between craving and suffering, we can also see two ways in which the elimination of craving brings the elimination of suffering. First, at the psychological level, when craving is eliminated, when the mind is completely free from craving, then one is no longer vulnerable to the type of suffering that takes the form of worry, stress, sorrow, lamentation, dejection, despair, misery. All of the psychological suffering is completely eliminated. And so one lives happily, peacefully, under all conditions. One is not yet free from pain. One can still experience bodily pain, illness, even sometimes severe, excruciating pain. But the pain, the illness will not pull down the mind into a state of dejection, misery, self-pity, distress. But one can endure the changing circumstances of life with complete equanimity, and inwardly one will always feel happy and content. Okay, so this is the psychological level in which the end of craving brings the end of suffering. But then there is the other level, the level corresponding to craving as the cause of repeated existence. And so when craving is eliminated, then there is no longer any renewed becoming, renewed existence. So with the passing away of the liberated person, there's no arising again of the compound of the five aggregates that makes up dukkha, the five contaminated aggregates. But with the passing away of the liberated person, the mind, you could say, enters or merges with the unconditioned Nibbana. Okay, then, this is the third noble truth. The fourth noble truth is the way leading to the cessation of suffering, and that is the Noble Eightfold Path, right view, from right view to right concentration. We have already examined the Noble Eightfold Path in an earlier class. Okay, so I won't go over it again. Okay, so now Sariputta wraps up this section by saying, when a noble disciple has thus understood suffering, the origin of suffering, the cessation of suffering, and the way leading to the cessation of suffering, okay, just to fill in this section, you go to section 12. We've already gone through this, so I'll just go through it again. Okay, so when a noble disciple has thus understood suffering, the origin of suffering, the cessation of suffering, and the way leading to the cessation of suffering, he entirely abandons the underlying tendency to lust. Actually, you have to go to paragraph 8. He entirely abandons the underlying tendency to lust. He abolishes the underlying tendency to aversion. Okay, this shows how the noble disciple moves from the stage of string interest to the stage of non-returner, the third stage of enlightenment. Then he extirpates the underlying tendency to the view and conceit I am, and by abandoning ignorance and arousing true knowledge, he here and now makes an end of suffering. In that way, too, the noble disciple is one. Okay, at that point, the text is showing the attainment of arhanta, the fourth stage of enlightenment. In that way, too, the noble disciple is one of right view, whose view is straight, who has unwavering, confirmed confidence in the Dhamma, and has arrived at this true Dhamma, this good Dhamma. Okay, so this will be the explanation of the Four Noble Truths. And now, if there's any questions, please. Please feel welcome to us. Okay, could you, please take the microphone. Yeah, I should mention that we have to stop today at 11 o'clock because today is the first of the lunar month, and so we did not have to come and perform a little ritual here at 11.
My question is about the truth of suffering.
Yes.
Liberated different types of suffering, and at the end there's a phrase in thought or
in brief, the five aggregates.
In brief, the five aggregates of as a subject of clinging are suffering.
Yeah.
Here there are actually two questions. One is how is this impression that the five requisites of cleaning includes all the previous, all other suffering?
Yeah.
Or is it like one of those numerous suffering?
Okay, this is a good point. In other words, is the five aggregates just a way of comprising or, let's say, recapitulating all the other types of suffering, or is it adding one new item to the list?
That's one question.
Okay.
And then
Let's take each question one question at a time. What I would say is both. The five aggregates are said to be suffering and grief. One way, because it is the five aggregates that undergo birth, the five aggregates that undergo illness, that undergo old age, that undergo death. The five aggregates that one experiences sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair. So that's the way in which the five aggregates comprehend or comprise the other types of suffering. But also it seems to me the five aggregates give a much wider, much broader dimension to the meaning of suffering. Because there are many types of experience that do not fall under the previous types of suffering. The types of experience which are pleasant and joyful. But those are also, because they're experiences had through the five aggregates, they're also dukkha. Because they're experiences through these five aggregates which are impermanent, empty, selfless events or processes. Therefore they're also dukkha. Okay, second question.
Second question. Whenever I look at the five aggregates related to suffering, it is usually not five aggregates, the five aggregates of clinging.
Right.
Is there any place five aggregates alone is suffering? Mm-hmm.
I think one has to understand that it is the five aggregates. It's Panchupadana Kanda. Okay. The way I understand this, that it doesn't necessarily mean that the clinging is occurring at the same time as the five aggregates. But these five aggregates are vulnerable to clinging. So let us say that the clinging underlying the five aggregates. There's only one text I know of that distinguishes between simple five aggregates and the Panchupadana Kanda, the five aggregates subject to clinging. But I don't know any text which explicitly speaks about what are the types of aggregates that are not upadana, that are not subject to clinging. But the way this is understood, this would be the five aggregates of a liberated person. Okay, so within any kind of unliberated person, the five aggregates are always Panchupadana Kanda. That there's some degree of upadana, of clinging, underlying all of our ordinary experience. So even when maybe I'm doing a meditation, my mind is very peaceful, focused on the meditation object, I don't experience myself clinging to something consciously with the mind. But there's some, you say, disposition to clinging, to underline that peaceful, blissful, meditative state. And so then that clinging can come in, and I grasp that state and think, I have to preserve this. I have to continue this. I want to continue this state. And the next time I sit down, I think I have to recapture that experience. And so in this way, you can see how the clinging is lying behind that experience. Okay. Let us take some further questions. clear today in another case on self-use of five aggregates is really, it is an interpretation of that is to say the five aggregates represent the material world and our interaction with it. And that can never be satisfactory. Okay, form I would take to represent the physical phenomena of the world. Yeah. And all the other four five factors are psycho-mental factors. So just looking at comprehensively, it would seem the five aggregates represent the material world and our interaction with it. Okay, so the five aggregates representing the physical world along with our interaction with it. And it says that will always lead to suffering. Yeah. Is that a correct interpretation? I think it's partially correct. It's just that the form aggregate also includes the body and the sense faculties, the physical sense faculties, as being those forms in the world, that material form in the world through which we interact with the material world. So we could say that the five aggregates represent the world and our experience of the world. So I wouldn't separate form out as being something in the world but not part of our experience, because form is also that through which we experience the world, or through which we experience the sensory world. In the conclusion that always results in suffering, that is a definite conclusion. I would say maybe not that it always, well, if we say that it always culminates in old age and death, and that way it always leads to suffering, but not in the sense that every experience is necessarily an experience of suffering. We have to distinguish these different aspects of dukkha, one as suffering, the other as being that which is inadequate or unsatisfactory. So in terms of the five aggregates, all experience is inadequate and unsatisfactory, insecure, unreliable, but it's only from occasion to occasion of the experience that the process of the five aggregates results in actual suffering. Okay, maybe we'll take one more question. I see that somebody's giving a subtle hint. Okay, if there's no more questions, then we'll end with the sharing of the memory. And then after lunch, I will come back here 12 to 12:30. Maybe you're getting in touch. Okay, we'll make it 12 to 12:30 for the discussion period and the issues remaining from the talk today. Okay. And if anybody wants to stay for the next meal offering ceremony, you're welcome to do so. Okay, so we share the merits, the Vedas, the deities, the Buddhas, the spirits, the Nagas, the dragon spirits, and all other things. เอตาปะตาจังเอหิสังปะจังปุญญสังปะจังสัพเพปุสานุโมทันตุสัพพะสัพพะติสุติยาเอตาปะตาจังเอหิสังปะจังปุญญสังปะจังสัพเพปุสานุโมทันตุสัพพะสัพพะติสุติยาสัพพะสุภาจายะวิเศษโตเทตังเสเรตัสกายสัพพังรูปยารูปิจัสสัสสัญญาสัญญาลุขาโตสันตุโตสันตุ